The Paradox Student Part 1. The Unwelcome Arrival Professor. Vexthara's crystalline form shimmered with irritation as she read the transmission for the third time. Her translucent blue facets caught the bioluminescent lighting of her office, casting fractured rainbows across the walls of Nexus Prime Academy's physics department. 847 cycles of teaching the galaxy's most brilliant minds, and now they wanted her to babysit a primitive from a death world. A human, she muttered, her harmonic voice creating discordant frequencies that made the nearby quantum resonance crystals vibrate unpleasantly. They expect me to teach theoretical physics to a creature that still uses base 10 mathematics and believes in linear time. Her office door chimed, admitting Dr. Kolvash, whose metallic exoskeleton gleamed under the Academy's ambient lighting. The Titan species had mastered quantum mechanics before humans had discovered fire, and his presence usually brought Vexthara some measure of intellectual comfort. "I assume you've read the cultural exchange notification," Kolvash said, his mechanical voice clicking with what she recognized as amusement. "The Death World specimen arrives today." "Don't call it that," Vexthara snapped, her crystalline structure flickering between blue and angry red. "The consortium's diplomatic protocols are already insufferable without adding species prejudice to the mix." She paused, considering. "Though I admit the biological reports are disturbing. They actually evolved on a planet where everything tries to kill them. How does such a species develop abstract thinking?" "Survival instincts, perhaps," Kolvash mused. "Fight-or-flight responses might create unconventional problem-solving approaches." "Unconventional," Vexthara repeated with disdain. "In theoretical physics, unconventional means wrong. We deal with universal constants, mathematical elegance, and pure logical structures. What could a panicked prey animal possibly contribute to quantum field theory?" The conversation was interrupted by another chime. Chancellor Morntai's massive form filled the doorway, his 8 arms gesticulating with the controlled chaos that had made him the most effective administrator in the consortium's educational system. "Professor Vexthara," he rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had successfully managed 17 different species' educational requirements. "I trust you're prepared for our distinguished guest?" "As prepared as one can be for academic charity work," she replied icily. Morntai's eyes, all 6 of them, focused on her with uncomfortable intensity. "This is not charity." The human scored in the 99th percentile on every entrance examination we could devise. Her mathematical reasoning tests broke our evaluation algorithms. "Impossible. Their species hasn't even unified their basic scientific principles. They still debate whether their universe is deterministic or probabilistic." "Perhaps," Morntai said carefully, "that debate has given them insights we lack." Before Vexthara could formulate a suitably cutting response, the Academy's main transport platform hummed to life in the central courtyard. Through her office's transparent wall, she watched a small, impossibly fragile-looking creature materialize in the quantum beam. The human stood barely 1.6 meters tall, covered in what appeared to be synthetic materials rather than proper protective chitin or energy shields. Her skin was an alarming shade of brown, completely exposed to environmental hazards and topped with dark filaments that seemed to serve no apparent biological function. Most disturbing of all were her eyes, forward-facing like a predator's, but wide with wonder rather than hunting instinct. "Jenna Martinez," Morntai announced. "Age 19, standard cycles, graduated from something called MIT, with degrees in theoretical physics and applied mathematics. Her application essay was illuminating." Vexthara watched the human girl spin slowly, taking in the floating spires of Nexus Prime Academy. The institution was a marvel of engineering. 7 interconnected towers suspended in null gravity fields, connected by probability bridges that existed only when someone needed to cross them. Students from 43 species moved between buildings by manipulating localized spacetime, while bioluminescent knowledge trees grew from quantum soil, their branches heavy with crystallized information. The human just stood there, mouth agape looking exactly like the primitive creature Vexthara had expected. "Look at it," she said dismissively. "It's overwhelmed by simple dimensional architecture. How do they expect such a being to grasp 11-dimensional quantum matrices? Her, Morntai corrected gently. And perhaps you should reserve judgment until after your first class. The Advanced Theoretical Physics lecture hall was a sphere of pure energy, its walls displaying real-time visualizations of quantum phenomena from across the galaxy. 37 students floated at various levels within the space, each positioned at the optimal angle for their species' sensory apparatus. Vexithera materialized at the chamber's center, her crystalline form refracting the ambient equations that drifted through the air like luminous snow. Her students represented the intellectual elite of known space: Krelith, the ethereal voidborn whose species existed partially outside normal space-time; Threxquin, whose hive-mind consciousness could process parallel calculations across 17 discrete thought streams; and 28 others who had scored in the top 0.1% of their species' intellectual capabilities. And in the lowest position, looking distinctly uncomfortable in an emergency life support chair, sat the human. Today we begin our exploration of quantum consciousness intersection theory, Vexthara announced, her harmonic voice creating standing wave patterns that the more advanced students immediately began analyzing. Who can tell me why the Heisenberg uncertainty principle breaks down at consciousness matter boundary conditions? 7 appendages, energy fields, and thought projections immediately responded. The human remained motionless, apparently struggling with the basic translation matrix that converted Galactic Standard into her primitive linguistic system. Krelith? Vexithara acknowledged the voidborn student whose form shifted between dimensions as she spoke. The principle assumes discrete observer-observed relationships, Krelith replied, her voice echoing from several parallel realities simultaneously. But consciousness itself exhibits wave-particle duality, creating recursive observation, loops that collapse into quantum paradox states. Adequate, Vexithara said, noting the way several students' confidence visibly deflated. She enjoyed maintaining intellectual hierarchy. Though your analysis lacks mathematical rigor. Threxquin? The hive mind student spoke through 17. Voices in perfect harmonic convergence. Mathematical proof requires 11-dimensional integration across parallel consciousness streams, yielding the equation. Complex formulas began writing themselves in the air, describing mathematical relationships that existed only in the deepest levels of theoretical physics. Better, Vexithera acknowledged. Though still incomplete, the full solution requires consideration of. She paused, noticing the human had finally moved. The primitive creature was leaning forward in her chair, those predator eyes fixed on the floating equations with disturbing intensity. Ms. Martinez, Vexthara said, unable to resist the opportunity to demonstrate the vast gulf between civilized minds and death-world instincts. Perhaps you'd like to contribute to our discussion? The human looked up, those alien brown eyes meeting Vexthara's crystalline gaze without flinching. The equation's wrong, she said simply. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Even suggesting that a professor's mathematics might be flawed was academic heresy. To do so as a first-year student from a primitive species was unthinkable. I beg your pardon? Vexithara's harmonic voice hit frequencies that made nearby crystals crack. The integration, Jenna said, standing up in her chair with the graceless movements of a creature adapted to fixed gravity. You're treating consciousness as a discrete variable, but that's not how it works. Consciousness isn't separate from the quantum system. It's part of it. You can't integrate around something that's already inside the equation. The silence stretched for several uncomfortable seconds. Then Krelith spoke, her multidimensional voice carrying genuine curiosity. How would you approach the integration? Jenna reached into her primitive carrying bag and pulled out what appeared to be a simple marking implement. She began drawing symbols in the air, not elegant energy constructs like civilized species used, but crude marks that hung in space like scars. Back home we call this the observer effect, she said, her markings forming into recognizable but unrefined mathematical notation. You don't integrate around consciousness, you include it as a probability function. The uncertainty isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. Vexithara stared at the human's primitive scratches in growing horror. The mathematics were ugly, inelegant, full of approximations and uncertainty principles that proper theoretical physics had moved beyond millennia ago. And yet, "That's not mathematics," she said weakly. "That's chaos theory." "Yeah," Jenna agreed cheerfully. "Chaos theory, quantum mechanics, and a little bit of what we call fuzzy logic. The universe is messy, Professor. Maybe our math should be messy too." The equation floating in the center of the chamber suddenly shifted, the human's crude markings, interacting with the elegant theoretical framework in ways that should have been impossible. And as the two mathematical systems merged, something unprecedented happened. The paradox resolved itself. For 2,147 cycles, the greatest minds in the pure galaxy had struggled with the consciousness quantum boundary problem. Civilizations had risen and fallen while their best theorists pursued elegant, beautiful, logically pure solutions, and a 19-year-old human from a death world had just solved it with what amounted to academic finger painting. Vexithara's crystalline structure flickered through the entire visible spectrum as she processed the implications. Around the chamber, 36 of the galaxy's most promising students stared at the crude but functional solution, with expressions ranging from awe to existential crisis. "Class dismissed," she managed to whisper, as the students filed out, chattering in 24 languages about what they had just witnessed. Jenna Martinez remained behind, still standing in her primitive chair with that unsettling human smile. "Professor," she said, "I was wondering about the semester project you mentioned. Something about a paradox equation that's been unsolved for 300 cycles? I'd like to take a shot at it." Vexthara's harmonic voice cracked like breaking crystal. "Ms. Martinez," she said, "I think that might be a very dangerous idea." But as she looked at the human's eager, predatory eyes, she realized the danger wasn't to Jenna Martinez. The danger was to everything they thought they knew about the universe. The elegant chaos 3 weeks had passed since Jenna Martinez had shattered Professor Vexithara's carefully constructed worldview with crude Earth mathematics. The crystalline Zephyrian had spent sleepless cycles reviewing her life's work, finding flaws in elegant theories she had considered unassailable. Worse still, word of the human's unconventional solution had spread throughout Nexus Prime Academy like a quantum virus, infecting even the most conservative academic minds with dangerous new possibilities. "The deadline approaches," Dr. Kolvash observed, his metallic exoskeleton clicking as he entered Vexithara's office. Through the transparent walls they could see students gathering in preparation groups across the Academy's floating spires, 36 of the galaxy's brightest minds, and one Death World primitive all attempting to solve the paradox equation. Vexithara's crystalline structure flickered with anxiety. The other students have formed collaborative clusters, sharing insights across 17 different mathematical traditions. Even Kreleth has partnered with the Titan Quantum Collective. She paused, her harmonic voice dropping to worried frequencies. "The human works alone." "Perhaps she prefers isolation," Kolvash suggested. "Her species evolved as solitary hunters." "Or, perhaps," Vexithara said, watching Jenna's small form hunched over primitive paper calculations in her cramped quarters, "the other students refused to work with her." This was true. Despite her shocking success in class, the galaxy's academic elite had been slow to accept that a creature from a backwater death world could contribute meaningfully to theoretical physics. Kreleth's study group had politely declined Jenna's request to join. Threxquin's Hive Mind Collective had simply ignored her entirely. The message was clear. Elegant minds pursued elegant solutions, and there was nothing elegant about human chaos theory. In the Academy's Grand Mathematics Hall, holographic displays showed the current state of each team's progress. The Voidborn group had developed a 17-dimensional approach that existed partially in parallel realities. The Titan Collective had constructed a quantum processing array capable of calculating 11 billion variable interactions simultaneously. Even the smallest study groups had produced theoretical frameworks of stunning mathematical beauty. And in her isolated quarters, Jenna Martinez worked with paper, pencils, and what appeared to be cafeteria napkins. "It's embarrassing," muttered Zixtar, a senior student whose species had achieved perfect mathematical harmony with universal constants. "She's treating the paradox equation like some primitive puzzle, instead of the pinnacle of theoretical achievement. Her methods lack sophistication," agreed another student, this one from a civilization that had encoded mathematics directly into their genetic structure. "True understanding requires elegance, purity of thought. You cannot solve universal mysteries with approximations." But Chancellor Morntai, observing from his administrative tower, wasn't convinced. His 8 arms worked independently as he reviewed Jenna's academic files, each appendage processing different aspects of her unprecedented performance. Her entrance exam scores hadn't just broken their evaluation algorithms. They had revealed fundamental flaws in how the galaxy measured intelligence. "Dr. Vexithara," he transmitted through quantum communication arrays, "I'm concerned about Ms. Martinez's isolation. Academic collaboration is essential for—" "She chose this path," Vexithara interrupted, though her crystalline structure betrayed her own uncertainty. "If she believes primitive methods can succeed where civilized minds have failed for 3 centuries, let her demonstrate." But privately, she found herself checking on the human's progress with growing frequency. Through surveillance crystals, she watched Jenna work through problems with a methodology that defied every principle of proper theoretical physics. Instead of seeking elegant solutions, the human seemed to embrace disorder. Where galactic mathematics pursued clean, beautiful formulations, Jenna's work looked like academic vandalism. Equations crossed out, rewritten, approximated, and held together with uncertainty principles that made Vexithara's orderly mind recoil. The night before presentations were due, an emergency signal echoed through the academy. Kreleth's study group had achieved a breakthrough. Their 17-dimensional mathematics had produced what appeared to be a complete solution to the paradox equation. The formula was a thing of transcendent beauty, existing across multiple reality states simultaneously, describing universal truths in mathematical poetry that brought tears to sophisticated observers. "It's perfect," whispered Threxquin, whose hive-mind consciousness allowed appreciation of the solution's full complexity. "Mathematically flawless, conceptually pure, aesthetically transcendent." Word spread quickly through the Academy's quantum communication networks. Faculty members materialized in the mathematics hall to witness the elegant proof. Even Vexithara admitted the solution's beauty, though something in her newly uncertain mind nagged at its perfection. In her quarters, Jenna looked up from her chaotic calculations as celebration sounds drifted through the Academy's walls. She had heard about Kreleth's breakthrough through the human translation systems, had seen the mathematical poetry that described reality with unprecedented elegance, and she knew it was wrong. Presentation day arrived with all the ceremony that Nexus Prime Academy could muster. The grand auditorium existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, allowing observers from across the galaxy to witness potentially historic mathematical breakthroughs. Representatives from the greatest civilizations floated, phased or quantum-tunneled into observation positions as 37 students prepared to present their solutions. Kreleth went first, her multidimensional form shifting between realities as she unveiled her team's elegant proof. The mathematics unfolded like cosmic music, each equation building upon the last in perfect harmonic progression. When she finished, the silence stretched for several reverent moments before applause erupted from multiple dimensions. "Magnificent," breathed one observer. "The most beautiful mathematical construction in recorded history." Threxquin's hive mind collective presented next, their 17-voice harmony describing reality through quantum calculations that existed as pure thought rather than crude symbols. Their approach was more technical than Kreleth's, but equally sophisticated, treating the paradox equation as a symphony of universal constants. Team after team presented solutions of increasing complexity and elegance. Each group had spent the semester pursuing mathematical perfection. creating theoretical frameworks that pleased the mind and satisfied aesthetic sensibilities. The galaxy's greatest academic traditions were on full display: logical purity, conceptual beauty, and intellectual sophistication. Finally, only one presenter remained. Jenna Martinez walked to the center of the auditorium carrying a stack of primitive papers looking absurdly small among the floating theoretical constructs that surrounded her. Her brown skin seemed even more fragile under the Academy's quantum lighting, and her simple clothing marked her as hopelessly primitive among species that had transcended basic matter. "Ms. Martinez," Professor Vexathara announced, her harmonic voice carrying across dimensional barriers. "Please present your solution to the paradox equation." Jenna looked around the vast auditorium, meeting the gaze of observers from 43 different species, then smiled that unsettling human expression that still made Vexathara's crystals itch. "Before I show you my solution," she said, "I want to talk about what's wrong with everyone else's." A collective gasp rippled through multiple dimensions. Challenging established solutions was academic heresy, but dismissing the work of the galaxy's brightest minds bordered on cosmic arrogance. "The mathematical proofs you've seen today are beautiful," Jenna continued, apparently unaware of the shock she was causing. "They're elegant, sophisticated, and completely wrong." "Impossible," transmitted Krelith, her multi-dimensional voice cracking with indignation. "Our solution accounts for every variable, includes all known constants, and resolves every theoretical contradiction." "That's the problem," Jenna said, pulling out her primitive marking implement. "You're assuming the universe follows your rules. But what if it doesn't? What if reality is messier than your mathematics?" She began drawing in the air, her crude symbols looking like graffiti among the elegant theoretical constructs. But as her equations took shape, something disturbing began to happen. The beautiful solutions presented earlier started showing stress fractures, their perfect symmetries beginning to wobble. "The paradox equation has stumped you for 300 cycles because you keep trying to make it elegant," Jenna explained, her markings growing more complex. "But paradoxes aren't elegant. They're contradictions, impossibilities, things that shouldn't exist but do anyway." Her equations spread through the auditorium like a virus, interacting with the other solutions in ways that revealed fundamental flaws. Where galactic mathematics demanded perfection, Jenna's approach embraced imperfection. Where traditional theory required certainty, her solution built uncertainty into its foundation. "This is chaos theory applied to quantum consciousness," she said, adding probability clouds to her calculations. "Instead of trying to resolve the paradox, I'm including it as a feature. The equation doesn't have one right answer. It has infinite possible answers existing in superposition until observed." Professor Vexathara watched in growing horror as her students' primitive mathematics began to demonstrate something impossible. The chaotic, ugly, approximation-filled solution was producing results that matched experimental observations with unprecedented accuracy. "But it's not elegant," she whispered. "No," Jenna agreed cheerfully. "It's not. It's messy, uncertain, and full of approximations, just like the universe." To prove her point, she activated a real-time quantum observation array, feeding her solution's predictions into the Academy's most sophisticated measurement devices. The results appeared instantly on multidimensional displays, showing quantum phenomena behaving exactly as her chaotic mathematics predicted. The elegant solutions, meanwhile, failed to match reality by significant margins. "Impossible," muttered a observer from the perfectionist collective. "Mathematics must be beautiful to be true." "Why?" Jenna asked. "Who decided that? Reality doesn't care about our aesthetic preferences. It just is what it is. Messy, contradictory, and absolutely amazing." Dr. Kolvash, whose species had built their entire civilization on mathematical elegance, found his worldview cracking like overstressed metal. "But without beauty, without order, how do we understand the universe?" "We don't," Jenna said simply. "Understanding is overrated. Sometimes you just have to accept that reality is weirder than we can imagine, and work with it instead of trying to force it into pretty equations." Chancellor Morntai, all 8 arms working frantically to process the implications, finally spoke. Ms. Martinez, your solution appears to be functional, but it violates every principle of proper theoretical framework. Good, she replied. Those principles were holding you back. The auditorium fell silent as the galaxy's greatest minds grappled with an uncomfortable truth. For millennia, they had pursued mathematical beauty, assuming that elegant equations reflected universal truths. The idea that reality might be fundamentally chaotic, that the most accurate descriptions might be ugly and uncertain, challenged everything they believed about the nature of existence. Professor Vexithara's crystalline structure cycled through colors she didn't know she could produce. Ms. Martinez, she said finally, you have just revolutionized theoretical physics. Have I? Jenna looked genuinely surprised. I just solved the equation the way we would back home. Earth taught us a long time ago that the universe doesn't make sense. We got used to it. As the implications sank in, observers began departing through various dimensional gates, quantum tunnels, and probability bridges. They carried with them news that would reshape galactic science. The Death World humans, with their chaotic thinking and messy mathematics, had capabilities that elegant civilizations lacked. Chancellor Morntai approached Jenna with something resembling awe. Ms. Martinez, I would like to offer you a permanent position at Nexus Prime Academy, full professorship, unlimited research resources, and the opportunity to teach other species how to think chaotically. Jenna grinned, that predatory human expression that no longer seemed quite so alien. I'd like that, but I have one condition. Name it. No more calling Earth a death world. It's not trying to kill us, it's trying to teach us. And apparently we learned something the rest of the galaxy missed. Professor Vexithara watched as her former student, now her academic equal, began discussing research possibilities with the Chancellor. The crystalline Zephyrian felt something she had never experienced in 847 cycles of life, intellectual humility. Dr. Martinez, she said formally, I apologize for my initial assessment of your capabilities. Jenna turned, her brown eyes warm with something Vexithara was learning to recognize as human compassion. Professor, you taught me something. Important, too. Elegance might not solve every problem, but it's still beautiful. Maybe the universe needs both. Chaos and order, mess and beauty, uncertainty and precision. A paradox, Vexithara observed. Exactly, Jenna laughed. And now, we know how to solve those. As the auditorium emptied, the 2 unlikely colleagues stood among the floating equations that had changed everything. The galaxy's physics had been revolutionized not by superior technology or advanced mathematics, but by a species that had learned to embrace contradiction. Earth's children, it turned out, had gifts that even they didn't fully understand, and the universe, in all its chaotic glory, was about to become a much more interesting place.